Now, the rest of the story. It was the dead of night and the 7th of July, but the motorist patrolman spotted appeared to be celebrating as though it were still the 4th of July. He had been driving erratically, had swerved off the road, demolished a row of shrubbery, ricocheted off a fire hydrant, and was careening down the Manila Long Island street as though nothing had happened. The officer gave chase, but the motorist, apparently as oblivious as he was to the patrol car pursuing him, just roared through the intersection. It was 2 a.m. when police finally got the motorist pulled over. The obvious became even more so when he got out of the car, bleary-eyed, unsteady. He asked, "What's the trouble, officer?" Perfunctorily, the patrolman recited, leaving the scene of an accident, running a red light. For a moment, the man seemed surprised, as though he were genuinely unaware of what he had done. But his self-confidence, however misplaced, quickly returned, and words were exchanged, sharper and sharper words, followed by a scuffle. Now, you don't scuffle with the Mineola police. Handcuffs were rapidly produced and applied. The motorist was under arrest, and he was all the way to the station before it completely sunk in that he was going to jail. Until the second he realized it, he had been jibing and joking, and now suddenly he panicked. They booked him. "Wait a minute," he protested. "You're not putting me in a cell. I have claustrophobia. I'll go crazy." But they did put him in a cell, and they slammed the steel-barred door, very possibly on the rest of his life. For this is the rest of the story. All through that dark night, in that dark cell, a dark fear crept into the prisoner's soul. This dreadful experience was the culmination of some terrible personal conflicts. One in particular, an impossible decision that loomed before him, the choice between his life with his wife and children and a new life with another woman. Drinking seemed to lighten the weight of this ponderous alternative, and that, coupled with an apparent innate weakness for whiskey, added up to big trouble, and now, specifically, to jail. And yet, in retrospect, that traffic light intersection in Mineola, Long Island, represented a crossroads of another kind. That reckless driver sought and got professional help, and he got straightened out. And although he was unable to rescue the remnants of his failing marriage, he did marry the other woman, and he is married to her even still, 51 years later. For what might have destroyed a public career and a private life, July 7, 1956, instead marked a new beginning, an ascension from the depths of indecision and addiction and despair to the summit of personal satisfaction and professional success. Oh, yes, you know the man I'm talking about. You know the troubled 31-year-old actor once led away in handcuffs to an overnight stay in the Slam. You know him as Paul Newman. Only now you know the rest of the story.
And now, the rest of the story. I met Paul Newman, Lolita Davidovich, and Gaylord Sartain in May 1989 when they filmed scenes for their film Blaze in my sleepy little hometown. Somehow, I convinced my mother to allow me to skip school for the 3 days to watch the film production at work. Everyone wanted to meet Paul Newman. I'm not sure if I was fully aware of who Paul Newman was at the time. As I remember it, Paul Newman took the time between shots to speak with us locals. In this photo, Paul Newman was drawn into a conversation with Mr. Gene Humphrey, a local legend in the race car circuit. In addition to racing, he could build a mean race car engine. Paul Newman seemed to take more interest in his conversation with Mr. Gene about racing cars than he did with most others. Mr. Gene has his hand on his nephew, Trent. Now, Trent grew up to be a race car driver as well. Of all the stars I met during the filming, I was most impressed by meeting Gaylord Sartain. Most people probably know him from the television show Hee Haw, but I was a big fan of Ernest movies. You know, Ernest Goes to Camp. Don't judge me. Well, no one was making a fuss that he was in town. No one recognized him. Everyone was focused on Paul Newman and Lolita Davidovich. I passed by one of the trailers, saw him sitting there, and did a double take. I had no idea he was going to be in the film. Now, I was a very shy child of 13. I mustered up the courage and asked him for an autograph, to which he gruffly responded, "No!" Then he laughed. "Of course," he said, and gave me his autograph. I was so excited. I thanked him shyly and turned to leave. Now, before I went up to him, people were passing and not paying him any attention at all. I was stunned when I turned around and saw that there was a line of about, 15 people maybe, waiting behind me to get his autograph. But I always wondered if they even knew who he was. I saw him later that day, walking a turtle on a leash. I swear it happened. People thought it was strange, but I saw the humor in it. I want to share a story about a friend of mine, Shane, who was then about 12 or 13 years old. He was playing pool in Blackie's Cafe in Saline during filming. It was the only pool table in town, and Paul Newman decided to check it out on a break. Paul Newman asked Shane if he could play him in a game of pool. Now keep in mind, Paul Newman was famous for his portrayal as pool hustler Fast Eddie Felson in the film The Hustler. Shane racked the balls and Paul Newman broke. Paul Newman never missed a shot and ran the table. Although Shane never got a shot, he got to say he played pool with Paul Newman. Paul Newman thanked Shane and was beginning to leave. Shane asked for his autograph. Now, Paul Newman was known for never signing autographs. In an apologizing manner, he explained that if he gave Shane an autograph, he'd have to give one to everyone there. Shane was happy just to say he got to play pool with Paul Newman. Okay, enough personal stories. When the event transpired that Mr. Harvey told us about, Paul Newman had just finished working on a film called Somebody Up There Likes Me, in which he portrayed boxing legend Rocky Garziano. James Dean was originally slated to play the boxing legend, but he had died in the now famous car crash before filming began. In looking for a replacement for James Dean, MGM gave Rod Taylor a screen test. Although they thought Rod Taylor wasn't right for this part, they offered him a long-term film contract. He starred in one of my all-time favorite films, The Time Machine. MGM eventually decided on Paul Newman in what was one of his first leading roles. Steve McQueen, George C. Scott, and Dean Jones made their film debut in Somebody Up There Likes Me as uncredited actors. Now, at about 1:45 on the morning of July 7th, 1956, Paul Newman left the Jolly Fisherman, where he, his wife Jackie, and some of their friends had dined. Behind me is the Jolly Fisherman restaurant. For reasons we can only speculate at, Jackie did not accompany her husband when he left the restaurant in his brand new Volkswagen. As he left, he drove over the shrubbery just outside the restaurant and ran over the fire hydrant just here, and then ran the red light just down the street. Thomas Hutchek, bartender at the Jolly Fisherman, called the police. Patrolman Rocco Caggiano pulled Paul Newman over shortly thereafter. When the patrolman approached Paul Newman said, "I'm acting for Rocky Graziano. What do you want?" The patrolman responded, "I'm Rocky too, and you're under arrest for leaving the scene of an accident." Patrolman Rocco Caggiano's nickname was Rocky. Paul Newman was surprised that he was being arrested and put up a fight, but Rocky quickly overpowered and handcuffed the actor. Patrolman Rocky immediately took the actor to Nassau County Police headquarters for booking. Paul Newman was shocked to find several reporters and photographers there waiting. Newman asked the patrolman, "How did the newspapermen know I was arrested so soon?" The patrolman explained that the press wasn't there for him. They were on hand for developments in a kidnapping case. When the press realized it was Paul Newman being arrested, they turned the cameras onto him. Now, at the time, Paul Newman wasn't the big star that he became. Paul Newman was surprised to learn that he was being booked into jail. Newman protested to the jailer "Don't lock the door. I don't like locked doors." The jailer ignored him. Later that morning, Paul Newman paid for the shrubbery, and the bartender dropped the charges. Paul Newman was released soon thereafter and was ordered to return the following month to answer for the damages to the fire hydrant and running the red light. If you're wondering, the Jolly Fisherman is still in operation today. You should check it out if you get the chance. Mr. Harvey explained that Paul Newman's marriage was in trouble. Perhaps that's why he left the restaurant without his wife. He claimed that he was unfamiliar with the Volkswagen's gear shift, which is why things went wrong. None of the newspaper articles mentioned anything about alcohol being involved in the event, but it may have been a factor. When Paul Newman's divorce with his first wife, Jackie, was finalized in January 1958, he married actress Joanne Woodward in the same month. Just 2 months after their wedding, Joanne won her first Academy Award for The Three Faces of Eve. She's one of the last surviving stars from the golden age of Hollywood and the oldest living Best Actress Oscar winner. Just a few months after Joanne won her Oscar, Paul Newman was nominated for his work in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. The other nominees included Tony Curtis, Sidney Poitier, Spencer Tracy, and David Niven. Paul Newman did not win the Oscar. It went to David Niven for his work in Separate Tables. There's a famous photo of Joanne Woodward grinning at her Oscar statuette while Paul sadly looks at his Noscar, which stood for Not an Oscar. You know, times were different in the 1950s. An accident like the one Paul Newman had could have ended his career just as it was really getting started. If it had ended his career, Paul Newman would not have made films such as Cool Hand Luke, The Sting, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Blaze, which was filmed just down the road in my hometown, and many more. Do you have a favorite Paul Newman film? I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching, and now you know the rest of the story.